Title: The Day We Keep. Consider, if you will, the peculiar mathematics of a long marriage. Two people, decades of Tuesdays, the accumulated weight of ordinary moments that seemed, at the time, entirely forgettable. We build our lives from these small bricks and rarely stop to examine them until the structure shows its first crack. Harold and Martha Ellison have arrived at such a crack, not dramatic, not sudden, but the slow kind, the geological kind, the sort that opens in the foundation while you're busy watching television. Tonight they will be offered a remedy. The only question worth asking is whether a wound once perfectly preserved is the same thing as a wound healed. The box arrived on a Thursday, which Harold would later note was significant only because Thursdays had always been their worst day. Something about the midweek position, too far from the weekend to coast, too close to it for the week's problems to feel urgent, made them snappish with each other. It was a Thursday when he'd said the thing about her sister, a Thursday when she'd spent their savings on the cabin without asking. A Thursday 22 years ago when their daughter Claire had called to say she wasn't coming for Christmas, and the line had gone quiet in a way that still lived in Harold's chest like a small, cold stone. The box sat on the porch when he opened the front door to check the snow, no larger than a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper already dampened at one corner. No postage, no return address, just their names in a handwriting that was neither masculine nor feminine, printed in blue ink with the kind of steady precision that suggested either a very calm person or a very careful machine. Harold and Martha Ellison. With our compliments. Martha. He carried it inside, shaking snow from his shoulders. The cabin was warm, the wood stove ticking and breathing in the corner, and she was at the kitchen table with her crossword, reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, the pose so familiar it sometimes made him ache in a way he couldn't locate. Package. He set it on the table. She looked up. We didn't order anything. I'm aware. She turned it over, examined the address. Her expression was the one she'd worn for 43 years when presented with something she'd already decided to distrust. He had loved that expression once. It had felt like safety. Now it felt like a door closing. Open it, he said. You open it. He did. Inside, nested in a mold of black foam that fit it precisely, was a small device that resembled nothing so much as a vintage transistor radio, the kind his father had kept on the workbench, olive green with a chrome dial, except that the dial was numbered not in frequencies but in dates. At the top, a small digital display showed today, December 11th, 2026. There was a single button, red, recessed, and a folded card which read, "The memory box allows the user to return to and re-experience any previous day in complete fidelity. Simply dial the date and press." The experience is entirely immersive. Duration: 1 hour of subjective time per session. We ask only that you use it gently, no signature, no company name, no website to scan. Martha read the card twice. A toy, she said. Probably. Or a prank. Someone's idea of probably, he said again. They ate dinner. Leftover lentil soup, bread from 2 days ago. The storm had been building for a week, and the road down the mountain had been impassable since Monday. They had supplies enough for another 10 days, the wood stove, satellite internet that cut in and out. The cabin had been Martha's idea, her unilateral, catastrophic idea, he had called it at the time, to sell the house in Portland after he retired and buy something remote, quiet, a place to find each other again, as if they were objects misplaced in a cluttered room. He had resisted for 6 months, then capitulated. And now here they were in December, on a mountain with no neighbors and a box from no one. After dinner, while Martha washed the dishes, Harold dialed the memory box to a random date from 12 years ago, June 14th, 2014, and pressed the red button. The kitchen vanished. He was standing in the backyard of the Portland house, and it was summer. Actual summer. Not memory of summer, but the thing itself. Heat on his bare arms, the particular smell of their neighbor's jasmine, the sound of a sprinkler 2 yards over. The apple tree was smaller than it would become. The lawn needed mowing, he'd been putting it off. He looked down at his hands, younger, the skin tighter, a wedding ring that had not yet developed its familiar groove. Claire was in the yard. She was 16, sitting cross-legged on the grass with a book in her lap, and she looked up when she heard him step onto the porch, and she said, "Hey, Dad," in that tone she'd had at 16, half elsewhere, half present, and then looked back at her book. He stood and watched her for the full hour. The light changed. A bird moved through the apple tree. At one point, Martha came out and handed Claire a glass of lemonade and said something he couldn't hear, and Claire laughed, and Martha laughed. And then Martha went back inside. Harold stood on the porch and did not move. He was afraid that if he moved, the seams would show. When he came back, he was in the chair by the wood stove and his cheeks were wet, and he hadn't known he was crying. Martha was standing in the doorway from the kitchen, drying a bowl, watching him with an expression he could not immediately read. "It works," he said. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What did you see?" "June of 2014. In the yard." He paused. Claire was there. Martha set down the bowl. She used it for the first time the following morning while he was out splitting wood. He came inside to find her sitting at the table with her eyes closed, her face arranged in an expression of such perfect, unguarded happiness that he stopped in the doorway and felt something compound, joy and grief, and a third thing he had no word for, the feeling of witnessing someone else's private country. When she opened her eyes, he said, "Where did you go?" She thought for a moment. "Our wedding. Good day to revisit. I'd forgotten," she said slowly. "How nervous you were. Your hands shook at the vows. I hadn't remembered that at all." "They did not." "They did," she smiled, and it was a real smile, and for a moment the ground between them felt different, firmer, like the thaw had come early. "Your left hand specifically." He sat down across from her. "Can I ask you something? You always ask first. Just ask. Are you happy? Here. The cabin. He gestured at the room, the windows, the storm outside pressing its gray face against the glass. She considered the question with the seriousness she gave all real questions. It was one of the things he had married her for. "I'm not unhappy," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." They used the box together that afternoon, taking turns, an hour each, reporting back like travelers from a small and private country only they shared. He went to the morning of their first apartment, woke up in the bed they'd shared, heard her in the shower, smelled the coffee she always forgot to turn off. She went to a Christmas, the good one, Claire home, snow outside, the whole family assembled and briefly, temporarily okay. He went to a Tuesday in 1991 when they'd driven to the coast and found a restaurant that no longer existed and eaten too much and laughed at nothing. She went to an evening in the garden of the Portland house. When she told him afterward, she'd sat alone after he'd gone to bed and felt, for 1 hour, entirely at peace with her life. "I'd forgotten that evening," she said. "I hadn't thought about it in 20 years. The box remembers everything," he said. "Someone does." On the third day, he noticed something. He had dialed to a date he was certain of, July 4th, 2009, because he could picture it clearly. A barbecue at the Kellermans next door, fireworks visible from their roof, Claire bringing a friend Harold had never met before or since. When he arrived in the memory, the barbecue was there, and the fireworks were there, but Claire's friend was a different person. Or rather, not a specific different person, but a face his memory could not confirm. A placeholder. He came back and sat with it. He told himself it meant nothing. Memory was imperfect. The box was, what? Perfect recording. And his own recollection of the friend's face had been hazy for years. Perhaps the box was more accurate than he was. He did not mention this to Martha. On the fourth day, she went to a date and came back later than usual, not 1 hour, but closer to 90 minutes, and she seemed disoriented when she surfaced, looking at him across the cabin with a momentary blankness, as if recalibrating which version of the room was real. "You were gone longer," he said. "Was I?" She shook her head. "It didn't feel longer." "Which day?" "February 2001. She reached for her tea, which had gone cold. "The week Claire was in the hospital." He set down his book. "Why that week?" She looked at the window. "Because I handled it badly," she said. "I was so frightened I couldn't. I kept leaving the room. I kept walking out into the corridor and standing there and not going back in. I've always wished I could." She stopped. "I stayed this time. The whole hour. I held her hand." He said nothing. The stone in his chest had companions now. She didn't know I was there, of course, Martha said. She was sedated, but I knew. She recovered, he said, carefully. She was fine. I know, Martha met his eyes, but I wasn't there. I should have been there, and I left. Martha, I'm not being self-flagellating. I'm being accurate. She picked up the memory box and turned it in her hands, the chrome dial catching the firelight. This is the most extraordinary thing that has ever happened to us, Harold. Do you understand that? We are being given the chance to. We're not changing anything, he said. No, but we're being present for it, retroactively present. She set the box down. Is that nothing? He looked at her, at the face he'd been looking at for 43 years, which still surprised him sometimes with its expressiveness, which could still do things he hadn't catalogued. It isn't nothing, he said. By the 7th day, he had established a system. He allowed himself 1 session per day. He chose the days carefully, the way one chooses what to eat when you're rationing. Not always the sweetest thing, not always the most necessary, but something. A morning, an afternoon. He was working backward through his life like a man reviewing a ledger for errors. Martha had no system. This was the first thing that concerned him. She went in 2 or 3 times a day. She stayed longer than an hour. She emerged from sessions with an increasingly fine-grained disorientation, not alarming, not sharp, but cumulative, like the light difference after clouds settle in for a week and you forget what the sun looked like directly. She ate less, she spoke less during sessions, and when she surfaced, she sometimes began a sentence in a different tense than she finished it, or reached for something that wasn't in the room. "You're there when I'm not," she said one evening. "In the memories. You're there." She said it with a small wonder, as if his presence in her past was unexpected, as if she had not previously considered that they had been in the same room for most of their lives. "I live there too," he said. "Yes," she smiled. "You do." On the 8th day, the satellite internet failed entirely, leaving them with no contact to the outside world. The snow had not stopped. Harold stood on the porch and watched it fall and tried to calculate exactly how much of this situation was metaphor. He went inside and dialed the memory box to December 11th, 1983, their first winter together, the apartment in Eugene, the year they'd been young enough that being broke and snowbound had felt like an adventure rather than a condition. He pressed the button. He arrived in the apartment. The smell of it, old radiator, her shampoo, the cheap candles she'd bought from a craft fair. She was in the kitchen, early 30s, wearing his flannel shirt, making tea. She heard him come in and said, without turning around, "I think the pipes are going to freeze." "Probably," he said, and his voice was steady. "We should run the tap." "Okay, Harold." She turned, and she was 32 years old, which meant he was 33, which meant 40 years had not yet happened, and she looked at him with her face completely open in the way that faces close, slowly, and then permanently over time. "Are you happy?" The same question he had asked her. In the cabin, in the present. He opened his mouth, and then the hour ended, and the apartment dissolved, and he was 68 years old in a chair by a wood stove, and the snow was still falling. He sat for a long time. On the 9th day, he found Martha dialing a date she'd already visited. He knew because she'd told him about it. February 14th, 2002, Valentine's Day, the year they'd abandoned the restaurant reservation and eaten pizza on the floor because the babysitter canceled and Claire had a fever, and they'd watched an old movie on a television that sat on the floor because the stand hadn't arrived yet. She'd visited it on day 5 and called it one of the happiest memories she had, which had surprised him. He'd thought of it as a failure, a canceled plan, and now on the 9th day, she was dialing it again. "You've already been there," he said. "I know." The card said to use it gently. "I know." She pressed the button. He waited for her. He put wood on the fire and made soup and waited. An hour passed, another 30 minutes. He sat across from her sleeping, seeming body. She didn't look unconscious exactly, more like profoundly elsewhere, the way people look when they're remembering something so specifically that they're half gone, and he talked to her, quietly, experimentally, the way you talk to someone in another room. "I've been thinking," he said, "that I gave you a reason to want to go back there. To February 2002, I've been not right for 2 years now, I think, since Claire," he stopped, "since Claire's second not coming home. since the argument that had gone too far and left a silence they'd both been too proud to fill. Since then, I've been not right, and I put it on you, and you've been in a cabin with me in the snow, and I've been not right, and that's— He ran out of words. Martha surfaced at the 90-minute mark. She blinked at the room, at him. I need to tell you something, she said. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard before, not distant, not strange, but certain, the way she sounded when she'd made a decision. Tell me. The second time is different. You'd think it would be less vivid, a replay. But it isn't. It's— She looked for the word with the patience she brought to crosswords. Richer. It's richer. The first time you noticed the big things, the pizza, the movie, Claire asleep in her room. But the second time I saw your face when the babysitter called, you were disappointed, genuinely, about the restaurant. You'd planned it for weeks, but then you just let it go. Completely. You hung up the phone and you went and got the pizza menu and you sat down next to me and you were just there. Entirely there. He looked at the fire. I'd forgotten that was in you, she said, not unkindly. It still is, he said. I think so too. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and the touch was so surprising after days of careful distance that he had to focus on the wood stove not to show it. I just needed to go back and find it. He turned his hand over and held hers. He did not sleep well on the 9th night. He lay in the dark, listening to her breathe, steady, certain, the rhythm he'd fallen asleep to on 1,000 different beds in 1,000 different places, and thought about the box in the other room with the particular wariness of a man who has understood too late what a thing is. In the morning, she was already at the table. She had the box in her hands. The date on the display was February 14th, 2002. Martha. She looked up. She had not yet pressed the button, and her face held an argument she'd been having with herself for some time, visible in the way her jaw was set and her eyes were doing their thinking. I know, she said. Then you know I'm worried. Yes, you've been there 3 times, he said, keeping his voice even, and each session is longer, and when you come back, you're— He searched for the honest word, not the alarming one. You're less tethered for a while. It passes. Each time it takes longer to pass. She set the box down. I know that too. He sat across from her. Outside, the storm pressed its gray-white weight against every window. What is it, he said, that you're going back for? She thought about lying. He could see her considering it, could read it in 43 years of her face. And then she didn't. That version of you, she said. The one who let go of the restaurant without making me feel it, who just sat down and was there. She looked at her hands. I want to be married to that person. I've been trying to figure out if I still am. And? I think you still are him. She met his eyes, but I needed to go back to believe it. Isn't that— Her mouth tightened. Isn't that a terrible thing to need to tell you? He sat with it. Let the weight of it settle fully. No, he said at last. Harold, it's accurate. I've been— He stopped, began again. I've been punishing you, I think, for the cabin, for the unilateral decision, for moving us here. I've been punishing you in small ways for 2 years and calling it grief about Claire when it was actually— He stopped again. It was cowardice. I was afraid if I let go of the anger, I'd have to feel how frightened I am about her, about us, about— He gestured at the room, at their ages, at the fact of winter. Just about. Martha looked at him the way she'd looked at him in Eugene, that open-faced look, unprotected. You're afraid, she said. I'm terrified, he said, routinely. She was quiet for a long time. The wood stove ticked. Don't go back again, he said. I'm asking you. She went back. He knew it because he woke in the night to an empty bed and found her in the chair by the wood stove, the memory box in her lap, the display reading February 14th, 2002, her face in its elsewhere expression. He stood in the doorway in the cold and watched her and did not wake her, because he understood, in some cellular way he couldn't articulate, that waking someone from deep inside a memory they'd already visited twice was wrong in a way he had no language for but felt clearly. He went back to bed. When he rose in the morning, she was in the chair exactly as he'd left her. Martha! He touched her shoulder. She looked at him. She blinked. She came back slowly, like something surfacing from deep water, and when she finally arrived fully in the room, she said, in a voice that had an odd, wondering quality, "How long was I gone?" All night, she repeated. She considered this. It was 3 hours in the memory, maybe a little more. I watched us eat dinner, watched Claire sleep, sat on the couch with you, and watched the movie again. A pause. You fell asleep. On the second viewing, you fell asleep, and your head went. She tilted her head to show him. And I remember thinking at the time that I was annoyed, but last night I wasn't annoyed. I just watched you sleep. Martha, that was 8 hours here. She looked at her hands. She turned them over, studying them. When I'm there, she said slowly, the here feels, she searched, like a draft, like something cold coming from under a door. He knelt in front of her. Listen to me. She focused on his face. I am here, he said. Right here. This is the real one. Look at my face. She looked. This is real, he said. 2002 is real too, but it's finished. It's a perfect finished thing, and it will be there. I believe it will be there if we need it. But Martha, this is, his voice went on him. He pressed it steady. This is where I am. This is where I need you to be. She reached up and put both hands on his face, his current face, 68 years of it, and held it in the specific way she had of holding things she didn't want to lose track of. I know, she said. She sounded like she knew. He should have hidden it. He understood that later, reviewing the morning with the helpless precision of someone reconstructing an accident from a single changed choice. He should have put the memory box somewhere she couldn't easily find it. He did not do this because he trusted her, because trust and 43 years of her face had made him credulous. Because love, in its long form, is a series of reasonable decisions that occasionally prove catastrophic. She took it from the table while he was splitting wood. He came inside 30 minutes later to find her not in her chair, not in the kitchen, not in the bedroom. He found the memory box on the table with the display reading February 14th, 2002 and the button depressed. He found, beside it, a folded piece of paper. Harold, I think I understand what the box is now. I don't think it's a toy or a prank or a miracle. I think it's exactly what it says, a box that holds a day. And I'm not certain, but I think that if you stay in a day long enough, the day will hold you back. I want you to know that I'm not frightened. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I'm sorry about the cabin. Not that I bought it, I'm not sorry about that. This place has been good for us even when we couldn't see it. But I'm sorry I didn't ask you. I made the decision from fear, and I did it alone. And I called it confidence because I was embarrassed by the fear. You deserved to be asked. The third thing is the most important. Do not come after me. The card said to use it gently. I have not used it gently. I don't know what that means exactly for the mechanism, but I know that what I'm about to do is not gentle. I am going to February 14th one more time. I'm going to stay. I'm asking you, in the strongest terms I have, not to do the same. What I want you to do is this. Go back to a good day. Not that day, a different one. One that's fully yours, that you haven't visited. Something you've been saving. Sit inside it for a full hour, then come back. Come back, Harold. Go see Claire. That's my instruction to you. Go see Claire. The here was good. The here was very good. I want you to know I knew that. All my love, all of it, every version. Martha. He stood with the letter for a long time. He picked up the memory box. The display still read February 14th, 2002. He dialed it forward to today's date, which accomplished nothing. It could only go to dates that had already happened. He turned it over in his hands. He pressed no buttons. He considered with terrifying clarity what she had described, staying long enough that the day holds you back, the accumulation of visits that blurred one time against another until the seams dissolved. He thought about her face that morning, tilted toward him as if from a slight distance, the draft under the door. He sat in her chair. The wood stove ticked. He thought, she gave me an instruction. In 43 years, Martha's instructions had always been specific to what she needed from him, not what was easiest. She had never, in his memory, told him to do something she hadn't thought through completely. He dialed the memory box. He dialed to August 19th, 1978, their second date. a date he had never revisited, had never even thought to revisit, had kept without quite knowing it, in the way you keep a particular photograph facing down in a drawer because the image is too potent for regular handling. A Sunday, a borrowed car. He'd driven her to the coast without quite admitting that he was in love with her, and she'd known he was in love with her, and neither of them had said it because the saying would make it a thing that could be lost. He pressed the button. He arrived. He arrived in the borrowed car on a highway that smelled of salt and distance, and Martha was 29, and she was laughing at something he'd said, something she found funnier than he'd intended, and the ocean was out ahead of them, gray and enormous and present. And she had her feet up on the dash in the way she would stop doing later when being careful became habitual, and she said, "Where are we going exactly?" "The coast?" he said. "You said that." "Where at the coast?" "I don't know." She laughed again. "You don't know." "I thought we'd find somewhere." She looked at him, 29 years old, her face entirely open, and she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. As if she had decided something. He drove. He did not speak for 15 minutes, which would have been unbearable with anyone else, and was exactly right with her. The highway unspooled. The ocean appeared in pieces between the hills. He understood, inside this perfect suspended August, that the 1 hour was almost done. He could feel the seam. He could feel the cabin waiting behind everything like a draft, like something cold under a door. He looked at her. She was watching the water, her feet on the dash, and her face had the quality of someone who has, for the moment, set down a weight they've been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing it. "Martha," he said. She turned. He said, "I'm going back." She looked at him with 29-year-old eyes that he had no right to interpret. She wasn't his Martha. She was the August 1978 Martha, a whole separate country, and she said, in a voice that was and was not his wife's voice, "Okay." He came back. He sat in the cabin for a long time after, the wood stove, the snow, her empty chair across from him with the crossword on the table beside it, her reading glasses folded on top, a word she'd been looking for still missing from the grid. He got up. He made himself breakfast. He ate it. He was deliberate about each action in the way you are when you've decided that the present tense is where you live. He packed a bag. He took the memory box and wrapped it in its brown paper and put it in the bag. He wrote a note, which he left on the table, though he understood she would not return to read it. He wrote it anyway. "I heard you. I went back to August 1978. I came back. I'm going to Claire." He went out to the shed and started the truck, which had sat for 10 days in the cold and needed coaxing. While he coaxed it, he thought about Martha in February 2002, watching him sleep on the couch, the movie flickering, the house quiet, Claire breathing in her room down the hall. He thought about that version of himself, the one who'd let go of the restaurant without making her feel it, who had sat down and been entirely there. He thought, I can still be that person, or become him again. Or not him, not the 2002 version, but some current renovation of him built from the same materials. He thought, that's what she was trying to show me. The truck started. He drove down the mountain through the snow, which had, sometime in the night, stopped falling. The road was passable. It required attention, required both hands and all his focus, and he was grateful for this, for something that demanded his presence so completely that absence was not an option. At the bottom of the mountain, where the road rejoined the highway, he pulled over and sat with the engine running. He took out his phone, which had signal again for the first time in 10 days. He found Claire's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice careful in the way it had been careful for 2 years. "Dad, it's me," he said. "I'm driving down from the cabin. I wanted to ask." He stopped. Began again. "I wanted to ask if I could come and see you. Not for any reason. No occasion. I just..." He stopped again. "Dad." Her voice changed. The careful tone went out of it. "Yes, come." He put the truck back in gear. Behind him, up the mountain, in a cabin with a wood stove and a crossword with a missing word and an empty chair, a memory box sat in a brown paper package with a dial set to February 14th, 2002. And whatever was in it, whatever perfect, finished, preserved thing it contained, kept. Martha Ellison did not vanish, precisely. Vanishing implies that something has been lost. Consider instead a woman who looked at 2 versions of a room, one remembered, one present. and chose the one where she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was loved. Consider a husband who was offered the same choice and drove through the snow toward the imperfect, ongoing, unfinished world. Neither of them was right. Neither of them was wrong. This is the peculiar mercy of the Twilight Zone. It does not adjudicate. It only asks that you look, clearly and without comfort, at the doors you choose to walk through. Harold Ellison will reach his daughter. He will sit in her kitchen and drink her coffee and be imperfectly, genuinely there. And somewhere in the fixed and perfect amber of a February evening 24 years ago, Martha will fold her hands in her lap and watch her husband sleep, and be at last entirely present for it. Some loves are large enough to occupy two different times at once. Whether that is a miracle or a tragedy is a question the Twilight Zone leaves, as always, for you.